Hello, I'm Ngamisile Pamela Ngubane, and this is the Entity Dynamics podcast. The title of today's podcast, which will be in several parts, is Communism, a Parasite Dream. Entity Dynamics is a culture development consultancy, and we work with social and civic organizations as well as commercial businesses to help those organizations and businesses assimilate the communities that they work with, as well as their employees, into the organizational culture of those organizations and businesses. At Entity Dynamics, we believe that culture creates behavior and behavior creates reality. And so in order to change a society's reality, we have to change a society's culture. The reason I have titled this mini-series is Communism, a Parasite's Dream, is because I honestly do believe that communism and communists are parasitic on the societies in which they operate, and that we need to purge our society of communism and communists. So in the previous podcasts, I said that I believed we needed to create a national culture where we can all agree on how to live so that we can foster social cohesion and create a civilization or a society that values economic development and education and meritocracy. However, I've come to the conclusion that there's absolutely no way that this can happen with communists in the mix and in such prominent positions in the body politic of South Africa. And I did actually say before that if we can't achieve this national culture, then we will have to revisit the notion of separate development from the National Party days in South Africa. Now, I am not advocating for a return of racial segregation or any sort of segregation between South Africa's people. But what I am saying is that we do need to segregate ourselves from ideologues whose ideology is essentially parasitic on the people and economy of this country. And that's the problem with communism. Communists don't create, they redistribute. Right? So what they do is they wait for a capitalist to create wealth, and then they seize that wealth and redistribute it to not the poor, but to themselves and their friends in different social and economic and political formations so that they can funnel votes from the people under their control to the political party. And that's what's been happening in South Africa. And this is why, for example, social grants are such an important thing to the ANC. That's why they're doing everything they can to manipulate the economy so that they can continue to pay social grants. They'll cut spending on other things so that they can continue to pay social grants, because people are voting for the ANC because they are afraid that the ANC is talking the truth when it says it's going to cut the social grants that the government would cut the social grants if the ANC was voted out of power. Obviously, everyone knows that a responsible government would not just willy-nilly end social grants, but a responsible government would phase them out in order to focus on developing people's human capital so they can actually help themselves and not be dependent on the state. Communists require people to be dependent on the state. That's how they maintain their dominance. So my view is that, if there is any sort of living together between communism and capitalism, one of them is going to have to be dominant. And as we all know, if communism is dominant, then you are headed for economic and social catastrophe. And this is exactly what happened in the USSR, Cuba, and so many other African countries that adopted communism, and what's happening in our economy. But no one ever names it. When you hear Helen Ziller, for example, talking to the South African Chamber of Commerce in the United Kingdom, she talks about how the ANC has some sort of hangover from its days of being in association with the USSR, and that's why it's still got these ridiculous economic policies. No, the ANC are a communist political party. They may have capitalists within their ranks, but those capitalists are clearly powerless to insist that the communism stop and that capitalism be the orientation in terms of formulating economic policy in this country. And this is displayed by the fact that the South African Communist Party is the is still so prominent in this country, is a alliance partner with the ANC, along with COSATU being a junior partner actually in this alliance, which is just there to like galvanize its members to get society to vote for the ANC. That's what they're like, the ones who do the heavy lifting. But the SACP are literally the high priests of the ANC ideologically. And as long as this is the case, then obviously capitalism is going to be subservient. As long as the ANC is in power, with its capitalist ideology as its motivating force, capitalism as a theory is always going to be subservient to the communists, right? So, and they can't, the two will never mix, they'll never synthesize, because they are utterly diametrically opposed. In fact, communism's objective is to eliminate capitalism from the world. So, if you're in a relationship with someone who wants to kill you, there's no future there, right? One of you is going to have to win out in their goal, right? If you want to live with someone who wants to kill you, you have to subdue them. You're not going to be living on equal terms with someone like that, So that's the same thing with capitalism and communism. Now, you'll get a lot of people in the ANC saying, well, we could have a mixed economy in South Africa. And then in that way, we could have a synthesis of capitalism and communism. Well, and then they'll cite, the Scandinavian countries as an example of mixed economies. That is just a complete misreading of the situation. Scandinavian countries are capitalist countries where they have very strong social welfare systems. And this is in line with capitalism in the West in general. The greatest philanthropists are Western capitalists. They know that there are certain people in society who won't be able to help themselves, and so will need a helping hand from the capitalists. And that's where that comes from. It's not communism, right? So, the question that then comes is, how is it that we as South Africans have been voting for communists for the last 30 years and not understanding that it is because we are voting for communists that our country is in this state where crime, which is a child of poverty, and where inequality and unemployment are such a entrenched problem? Why is it that we're never able to name communism as the reason? And I think the reason for this is to be found in critical theory. Now, critical theory is basically communism for the West, right? So in the 1930s, critical theory was developed. And essentially, it was communists who knew that they had to repackage communism for the West, because the West wasn't going to buy into communism. They weren't interested in communism, right? But its goals were the same: to subvert the West and to subvert capitalism. And you saw this, and it's gained traction. It's gained ground. In the 40s, it very much influenced the West's perception of the anti-colonial movements, for example. It also permeated the universities and was very much informing how students were reading the Vietnam War, how they came to view apartheid in South Africa. And it informed Barack Obama's desire to make America no longer an exceptional country in the world, but just being another one of the countries in the world in friendship with the family of nations, right? So it's very pervasive, and it is grounded in the ability to take conflict theory in sociology and make it the dominant theory in sociology. So sociology studies how societies behave and how human beings in the society interact. Now, there's always been there was always a conversation between the different theories in sociology. And, you found a dominance of two theories, which you could say were you couldn't say opposed, but had very different perspectives on how society functioned. And those were the conflict theory I just talked about and the functionalist theory. So the functionalist theory says that society is basically structured through how certain social institutions, namely the family, the church, and the school, socialize the people in the society. And that socialization will determine how people interact. It also says that these social institutions play the function of advancing the aspirations of the society and transferring the culture of the society to the next generation so that the society can continue to function in line with its aspirations. So it's overall a positive view of the social institutions that exist and the role that they play in society and in molding civilization. The conflict theory, on the other hand, says these social institutions, the family, the church, and the school, are all tools of elites to keep themselves in power and to oppress and dominate the rest of society. And so, very much so, what you see then in critical theory is a worldview based on a dichotomy within society and civilization of the oppressed and the oppressor. In this framework of oppressed and oppressor, obviously then you expect certain dynamics and certain reactions to be happening, or reactions to be informed by whether one is an oppressor or is oppressed. And this is exactly why we don't see communism as the reason for the problems in South Africa. We see the oppressor as the problem and the cause, right? And in critical theory, the oppressor is the West, the capitalist West, and the white capitalist West, and in many respects, the white Christian capitalist West. And you can even add another layer, the white male Christian capitalist West, okay? That's the oppressor. That's the epitome of the oppressor. And then obviously the oppressed will be the opposite of that. It's the global South. It's the socialist global South. It's the maybe not atheist, but definitely non-Christian global South, female, black, okay? And so when we have this dichotomy in society and we have one group being the oppressor and one being the oppressed, you then start to see why it is that communism is a parasite's dream. It's a parasite's dream because if you can situate yourself as an oppressed, you can pretty much get away with anything. You can literally do whatever the heck you want and you can just say, I'm oppressed, and everyone will just come to your rescue, because what it does is that it manipulates people's best human nature attributes, your empathy. It manipulates your empathy so that it can be turned against you. I mean, how sick is that? Because everyone wants to help a victim. Everyone wants to help someone who's oppressed. You wouldn't be human if you didn't feel like that. But now that's being manipulated. And this is why I say communism is a parasite's dream. Communism is also a fantasy, and a parasite will pretend not to be a parasite in order to continue being a parasite. And this is why communism is a fantasy, because if communism actually, it's a fantasy and it relies on fantasy. This is why I also say communism relies on a culture of dishonesty and a culture of victimhood. So the fact that it's a fantasy is that it's never worked, it's never going to work. And the reason why it's never going to work and it doesn't work is because it goes completely against human nature. And Marian N. Rothbard explained this in his essay, Egalitarianism as a Revolt Against Human Nature. And he explained that, and egalitarianism is communism. Let's just, clarify that. So he explained that the critics of communism did humanity a huge disservice by not initially condemning it as an evil outright. They did humanity a huge disservice because instead of condemning communism as an evil, they said, well, it's not going to work because human nature is such that it couldn't work. But it does have a moral a moral claim. It has a claim to being morally ideal. Something that goes against human nature, Rothbard argues, cannot be morally ideal, because if you're going against human nature, then you are essentially being anti-human, and being anti-human life and anti-human civilization. It's like saying, it would be so fantastic for the earth if everything was underwater and the whole earth was like a marsh and a swamp, or just lakes and ocean and rivers. Human beings are land-based animals. That's our nature. So if someone had to say it would be so cool if the whole planet was covered in water, you're basically undermining a human being's ability to survive. Obviously, we'd have to say, no, that's a very bad idea, and you're actually pretty stupid or evil to even think that that would be a good idea. Similarly, with communism, communism says that the reason why communism says capitalism is bad is because the means of production, the means of creating products in order to sell them, in order to make money, should be owned by the people. And by the people, they mean the state, right? And then in not owning the means of production, whoever uses the means of production to make money would then essentially be making money for the state to then distribute amongst the people. So basically it's saying that you as a human being, you should be focused outside of yourself as the reason why you do anything, right? But that's not human nature. Human nature is that I want to work for myself and my family. If I have anything left over, yes, then I'll give to my extended family, and then my community, and then my country. Socialism, communism says, no, it must be your country first and your society first, and then you and your family. That's not how humans are. And so in that, you have to be utterly dishonest and living in a fantasy world if you're actually going to say that communism is a viable option for us. And so, what you have, though, unfortunately, is that critical theory, in its promotion of this oppressor-oppressed dichotomy, has basically guilt-tripped the world into accepting its fantastical idea of human existence and what the future should look like. And this is why you see the West having retreated as it did after World War II, and allowing the decolonization to happen in the way that it happened, in a way that was utterly unbeneficial to itself, because essentially what critical theory had said to it was, look at all the carnage that you've created on Earth through World War I and II. You guys don't know what you're doing. You have failed humanity, and you really should just, give up and hand over to the global South, because they are obviously more humane than you are and have a better idea on how to lead humanity into a basically utopian future. And this is also why you saw a retreat of the National Party government and the Rhodesia Front government in South Africa and Rhodesia. And I'll get into that in another episode. But ultimately, basically, my point is that this is how it was that the National Party lost power in South Africa, how it was that separate development was not able to achieve its goals. And I will talk about that in the next episode. Thanks for listening, and please like, share, and subscribe and comment. Thank you. Bye.